All right, well, welcome everyone to our session for our corporate summit. We're so excited to have you at the Data-Driven Community Investments. Thank you all for joining us. Just a few Zoom etiquette pointers here. So if you could please mute your microphone. If you would just display the chat function, then you can submit your questions through the chat there. And if you have any questions at all, definitely pop them into that chat, and then we'll have some questions times at the end here. So plenty of time for that. Take a second here just to go. There we are. So welcome to the Data-Driven Community Investments. I know a few people are still joining us, but data waits for no man. So I know that we have a lot to get through today, so I want to make sure we have enough time for all of our presenters. First off, thank you to our virtual United sponsor, Delta Dental. Who would have thought that this would have been a sponsorship option, 5 months ago, but it's actually been an amazing sponsorship opportunity. And so thank you so much, Delta Dental. We appreciate you. Just a few housekeeping. Our agenda today is just kind of welcome introductions. We'll have our Mile High United Way team speak to what data has done to drive our community impact in our work. And then we are going to hear from a couple of partners, McKinsey Company and Starbucks Coffee. We're excited to hear from Ingrid and Samantha about what they do with data and how that impacts their community work as well. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Mile High United Way data partnership and just closing out. So just to turn it over to our Mile High United Way team, we have Dr. Francisca Anglo-Liza. I'm so sorry. I practiced it too. Darn it. You'll have to correct me. And then we have Tim Main. Both are in our community engagement and evaluation and learning group here at Mile High United Way. So they do a lot of amazing work with our nonprofit partners, our neighbors, our community members. So without further ado, I'll just turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, McKenna. So I'm excited to chat with you all today about a topic that I'm really passionate about around asset-based data. And so if you can skip to that next slide, we know that in today's world, there's just so much data that is available to all of us that it can be really hard to identify what is it that we need to make appropriate decisions and investments in our community, because we can look at one source and learn something and look at another source and find something completely different. And once we do find the data that we want to help inform our decision making, it can really, how the data is interpreted can really shape how those decisions are made and what investments are made. And then it can even reinforce many of the stereotypes that exist across our communities. So taking an asset-based approach to interpreting data and understanding it really helps to lift up the community and make more data-driven decisions and more appropriate investments for those folks we're trying to help. And so this next slide is really getting into what is deficit-based versus asset-based data. Now, during the middle of this pandemic, it's even more important to focus on the asset-based approaches, because as we look across the whole country at what's happening, we're seeing so many more deaths happening, so much more homelessness happening, so many people becoming food insecure who had never been before. It's really easy to look at the negative. And if we only focus on the negative and the sum of that in our communities, it really takes away from the value that those communities themselves can bring to help co-create solutions for us. So this table is showing a deficit-based approach versus an asset-based approach. So the deficit-based approach really focuses on those problems in a community like homelessness, whereas an asset-based approach focuses on a community's strengths and the resources that it has to help incorporate those into the solutions. A deficit-based approach really reinforces those stereotypes that exist about different communities, whereas an asset-based approach acknowledges the strength that people in those communities have. The deficit-based approach can focus on individual failures, while the asset-based approach looks at the wider system and what may have caused these issues to arise in the first place. And then finally, the deficit-based approach tends to think of people as objects of charity, while the asset-based approach really tries to empower people to develop their own solutions and work with a variety of partners. And so this slide is one piece of work that I've been helping United Way on for many years, and I'm really excited about the changes we're making in it. It began as the Community Needs Index with a more deficit-based approach. The photo you're seeing is a map of Metro Denver and all the different neighborhoods across the counties that we serve here at Mile High United Way. Originally, it was a Community Needs Index, looking at data from the terms of like the percent of individuals without a high school diploma, the percent who are uninsured. And more recently, we've been really working to shift this language to be the Community Opportunity Index. So reframing how we're looking at the data and thinking about these neighborhoods. So the neighborhoods that you see highlighted in purple, places like Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, these are the neighborhoods that we've determined have a very high opportunity for partnership with Mile High United Way. These are the neighborhoods where our investments can be made, and there's a lot of opportunity for further engagement with those communities. So there's a lot of quantitative data that we use to begin determining how we can make these decisions and how are we interpreting that. But the quantitative data isn't all of it. We really value the community voice as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Frankie to talk a bit about how we bring that qualitative data into our decision making. And Frankie, I think you're muted.
Yes, you're right. Thank you, Tim. So my training is as a cultural and medical anthropologist, and health disparity is something that's I've been very passionate about and trying to understand. And teaming up with Tim as I call him, our data ninja, it's been great because we really rethink what other opportunities are there for collecting information and data. And one of the key methodologies or ways of other points in order to get this data is this community-based participatory research. And that's something that we really have taken a couple of years to develop within the different communities that we're working in. And we primarily use what we call advisory councils or leadership councils. And these councils are, bringing together residents of specific populations, and you see them on the screen, to talk about, what are the issues, what are the strengths of their community, and help train them to collect information and data, from their own families, from their own neighbors, help to understand that data, analyze it, and then come up with solutions that they think are appropriate, as Tim said earlier, for their community. And the other methodology we use is we call community conversations, and these are, talking with school districts and churches, government entities, nonprofits, all the other different stakeholders in a community to understand their perspective as perhaps service providers or, speaking with faith-based leaders to really understand what's the context, or what's more of the context, right? So residents give one sort of context and these other stakeholders provide another context. And so this is really important for us, again, to gather both the qualitative and what we call the quantitative information, because often what we lack is the context for this information. And without the context, I think we're going to lack the opportunity to be able to address, any issues and or strengthen certain assets that communities have. And so, and we could go to the next slide, McKenna. And so, this became really apparent, I think, during this time, with the pandemic. Specifically, give you an example. So when the pandemic hit, we saw that some of our youngest citizens of our communities were being adversely affected, especially around education. And as many of you know, the digital divide is a huge issue. It has been, but it really came to bear. I mean, it just exacerbated everything within the communities that we worked in. Why? Well, we found that many of our family members, and this is true nationally, that many families are using their phones, for example, to get the internet. So imagine having to do your homework through your phone. They didn't have, laptops or desktops. And then many of them weren't even connected to the internet themselves. And so our partnership with Comcast in this particular, example was a great asset for our community at Mile High United Way. They really helped us to address some of those issues, help us address the digital divide, and what do we need to do to prepare. And so we went out there and talked to the families, we talked to teachers, we school district members, and tried to understand, well, how do you want this to be addressed? And one of the things, the solutions that they came up with was, okay, so, training, they need more training on how to access the internet. And then once they're on the internet, how do you access different school district portals? And so again, it's like, how do you bring all this information together, not just knowing where the high rates of infection are, but really understanding, well, how is that community addressing those high rates of infection, and what are things that maybe perhaps we didn't think about, and how to address that issue. So now I'm going to hand it back to McKenna, and just to kind of, help us understand further, I think, what other corporate partners of ours are doing.
Thank you so much, Tim and Frankie. We really appreciate you all kind of sharing sort of where we start and how we continue that relationship with our community. So I'd like to introduce Ingrid Mian. She is joining us from McKinsey Company. She's an associate partner, and she works in the Washington, D.C. office. Ingrid is one of the leaders in the digital supply chain practice in North America, focusing on driving digital transformations across medical devices, pharmaceutical, and consumer industries. So Ingrid combines cross-cutting operations knowledge with a deeper understanding of supply chain topics, strategy, and change management drivers. Ingrid is one of the leaders in the collaboration with the World Economic Forum on end-to-end lighthouses, and leads knowledge development for supply chain topics across McKinsey's Digital Capability Center in Chicago. So in addition, Ingrid leads McKinsey's Hispanic and Latino network, focusing on creating exceptional environment for diverse talent and supporting the community outside the firm. Ingrid holds an MBA from ESADE Business School and an undergraduate degree in economics from ITAM in Mexico City. So prior to joining McKinsey, she worked in banking and across assets and liability management and strategy. So with that, I'd love to introduce Ingrid. Ingrid, thank you so much for joining us. Take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for United Way for the invitation to share this. When talking to the team, I was asked like two main questions that I would like to share. So one, as many of you may have known, we have recently published some perspectives of what is the impact of the current situation, or what's the expected impact of the current situation in small and medium businesses. And the questions the team asked were, one, why did we decide to do this? Like, what prompted us to write what we were writing? And then two, how did we use data, and how do we go about getting that data in order to be able to drive the insights that we brought into the table? And so I wanted to share a little bit of, starting with, I mean, everybody knows this context. Like, first and foremost, this is a global humanitarian challenge that has been affecting us all. And if we go to the next page, one of the things that we have seen is that there's not only about the two imperatives that we're seeing in our time, right, are about safeguarding our lives and then safeguarding the livelihoods of the people around it. And we see a lot of effects that are happening up and down the communities, and up and down everywhere that we are at, right? So when we were thinking about this, there are multiple things that we have been publishing in perspectives, but in particular looking at the situation of the SMBs. What we wanted to do, and what prompted us to do this, is we had the objective of bringing in data and bringing in insights that could help not only inform about the current situation that these companies are facing, but also be able to allow people to really think about what solutions could the ecosystem think about and collaborate going forward, right? The idea has always been As Tim was saying at the beginning, the idea was always not about only talking about the challenges and reinforcing stereotypes, but it's always about really understanding what the drivers of the situation is that these companies are seeing, to be able to form solutions. And so in particular, when we started to look at the small and medium business, and in particular minority owned, one of the things that we started with a hypothesis, if you go to the next page, is we all know that both from an employment perspective as well as distribution, if you think about what the potential effects could be from the economic situation that we are today, there is a disproportionate amount of minority-owned businesses that are in industries that are bound to be affected by the situation. So think about everything that has to do in person, right? Food and services, personal services, retail, healthcare, all of these industries are bound to be in a situation. And so we wanted to understand what were people feeling, what the companies were feeling about it, how were they handling the situation, and how can companies in the ecosystem continue to help. I want to highlight, again, going back to Tim, I'm taking all of the pointers from what he was saying, but I do want to highlight, if we go into the next page, that at the end of the day, minority-owned business are a significant source of job and growth creation and wealth creation, right? They are the system behind what really pushes the United States. And so being in an ecosystem where they may be struggling has significant effects for the overall community and for the country, right? And we knew that there were some precarious conditions that they had before COVID, and so these conditions have continued to affect them or worsen the situation. So we did believe that there was opportunity to take action around relieving, restarting, recovering, with things that could go from providing the technology that they need, providing services, supporting from a access to financial credits or institutions to drive a difference, right? And for us, data and insights were the way to do it, because when you're bringing the facts forward, that's how you build a business case to actually be able to take action. And so I think the second question, that's what powered us to do it, the idea of bringing the voice through. And so how do we went about driving that? And other than a title slide, which is the next one, I'll just talk about it. But we did want to start, we always start when we're doing this type of research with what are our objectives, right? Specifically, what do we want to achieve? What are the types of insights that we want to bring, and how do we see those insights being used, or that data being used going forward? I think many times when people think about data, and this is not only in the context of this conversation, but as McKenna was saying, I do work a lot with digital advancements, technology, and every time that people talk about data, the first point that a lot of people start with, okay, let's gather a lot of data, right? And what I think that having a clear objective of what exactly is it that you want to achieve with that data, what are the types of insights that you have, it's extremely critical. The second thing that we went about doing is to, based on what we knew and based on what we had heard, defining a set of hypotheses of what did we expect the data to tell us. And it's not intended at all to guide the results. It's much more to make sure that if the that we have the information and that we're collecting the right information to either disprove what we thought or prove, right? Because you want to make sure that the data that you collect is tangible, that the data that you collect is real, that it's comprehensive, and that gives you both pictures, right? The picture that you could tell you know what you thought of before was wrong, or the picture that can tell you what you thought about it was right. So we start with those hypotheses. And then from there, I do have to say, we do have a research team that helps us identify what the best sources of this data is. which could go from, in the case in particular of the article, an understanding of the structure of SMBs through the Small Business Association. It goes from other perspectives that people are putting out there. And then on top of that, what we did is we created a survey that was launched, and well, it was launched to more, right? But it was answered by over 1,400 small and medium businesses across the United States, and that had a set of questions that were focused on some cases it was to understand the size of the company, how many employees they have, everything that you think about from getting the data to understand who's answering. But then we were really focused on understand how people were feeling, what was the changes that they were having in the situation. And we went through several iterations of that survey, right? So we started with the initial set of questions, and that would be both asked personally as well as sent to people to answer. But we started with a set of questions, and we continue to refine based on really trying to prove out the robustness of what the answers to those would be, right? Were we going to get information that when we got back, we would not be able to interpret? Or what if, like asking a lot of, what if the answer was this? What would this tell us? Does this give us enough? And do we need a little bit more clarity in order to be able to drive something insightful that that goes back to our objective of being able to share? And so we used a panel firm to actually launch that. We do focus on trying to understand the firms and partners that can help us gather that data. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that the sample or wherever you're getting the data from is not only credible, but also has the access to the place that you're going or the insights you want to drive. And then we came, we set up, of course, targets of the minimum representative sample that we wanted to have. So we know the composition of small and medium businesses across the US. We wanted to make sure that the sample that we were getting was representative, meaning a minimum of certain respondents by state, by sector, by size. And anyway, I'm speaking a lot. It was a really long process to actually be able to do, with a lot of iterations to get it. And then from there, data comes back, and we spend a lot of time with our research teams to make sure that the insights are robust, that we are not, there's two ways of handling the data. One is you drive the insights that the data is telling you, and the other one is you make the data tell you what your insights you want. The second one should never be done. So it's like that analysis of really going deep into the data and understanding what the data is telling you to bring those perspectives forward. And then from there, drive certain conclusions, in our case, about what people could do to take action. That was our focus overall. I'll stop talking, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. And I loved what you said of like, just even starting out the process, what's our intention before we start this? And I love that you finished with, you can't twist the data to say what you want it to say, which I think is sometimes what we run into in different reports and things. So I really appreciate your insight and talking us through that process. And again, we'll be taking questions, so absolutely drop them in the chat. We'll have some time towards the end. But thank you so much, Ingrid. We really appreciate you speaking to that report. So next up, we have Samantha Iddings. I just want to say a little bit about her. She's a manager at the Starbucks Global Social Impact Team, where she leads the community store strategy. So she holds a master's in development management from London School of Economics and spent nearly a decade working with youth education and global poverty alleviation, as well as supporting initiatives in the United States, Latin America, Sub-Saharan African, and Southeast Asia. So in 2015, Samantha joined Starbucks, inspired by its mission to nurture the human spirit and the commitment to be a different kind of company. Samantha is a proud born and raised from the Southern Caribbean. She comes from Curacao, I believe I said that correctly, in the Caribbean. I looked it up, beautiful country. She now lives in the beautiful Washington countryside with her husband, Ian, who's a proud Denver native and a Broncos fan, so whoop, whoop. And her pit bull, Andy Brown, which I love his name, so cute. So Samantha, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you here, and take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, McKenna. Yes, my husband made sure that I added the Denver Broncos reference in there, so I'm glad I got that little shout out. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. You know, I think what's important when we look at what everyone has talked about so far, the way we especially look at it at Starbucks, is when we think about data, it's really about storytelling. Everything we do, it's about storytelling, and data is an important component of that. And so, you know, we are great storytellers at Starbucks. We usually start a lot of major meetings with coffee tastings, and that's part of our stories. We ground everything in our partners, and partners, if you hear me say it, is our word for employee. Everyone that works from the headquarters to our baristas in the stores are all partners. And that's really what grounds us, not just in how we drive our business, but also how we look to make a social impact. So when you look at Starbucks, we stand for three major things right now. People positive, being planet positive, and being profit positive are at the heart of everything that we do as a company. And therefore, global social impact is a huge part of that. Like McKenna mentioned, I came from international development originally and worked in education, and was a little apprehensive coming over to the corporate side of things, you know, personally. But what really drove me to want to join Starbucks was the fact that it wasn't about a department that did good. It was the fact that a department was leading in some of these innovative ideas for social impact, but really every single part of the business is dedicated to making a positive impact in their communities and in the world. And therefore, even when you look at things like our Global Impact Report, which I'll go into a little bit more detail, it's actually collecting information from across the company and across these major initiatives, because it's embedded in everything that we do. And so, you know, I also put up there our Starbucks mission, which is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. And I know sometimes companies have a mission statement and it's up there and you don't really refer to it. I guarantee you this comes up at least once a week at Starbucks. And so it really does ground us and help us to drive our work. So with the Global Social Impact Report, we have a link to it, I think, at the end as well. We've actually been doing these since 2001, and it's been our way to hold ourselves accountable in our pursuit for good. This specific impact report has three main focus areas. So, and Starbucks has three main focus areas, which is leading in sustainability, creating meaningful opportunities, and strengthening our communities. And I'll dig into a little bit more of the strengthening our communities, because that's where my area of expertise lies right now in my programming. But I think what's really important when you just think about what those three frames are, it's about using our scale for good. And we also say at Starbucks that we are performance driven through the lens of humanity. So we really, you know, we are a company. We have a responsibility to be successful through our performance, but everything we do is through that lens of humanity. And even more deep than that, a lot of our initiatives within Global Social Impact are really about our partners and what would make them proud. Like when we walk into a store, when we talk about the work that we do, it's really what would make our partners proud. Everything from, you know, supporting coffee farmers, going all the way to, you know, the origin of where coffee comes from, to how do we actually make them more successful? That's where that creating meaningful opportunities is. How do we create education opportunities and opportunities for them to grow within their own careers, within their own lives? And then also, how do we then use the physical asset that is our stores, which are, you know, in all kinds of communities all across the way? How do we leverage them for good? And even how do we start to intentionally target some areas where we feel like, given our scale or our commitment, we can really make a huge impact? And that's really the community store that I look at. But what I think is really important, again, just kind of tying back to these things that we talk about, and Ingrid touched on it, even when we talk about impact, that hypothesis is really important, right? That what do you think that theory of change is? If we do X, we think it's going to make this kind of impact, and therefore we're going to get this kind of change in the world, and that kind of positive change in the world. And you know, one of the things we talked about in setting up this conference call was just some really practical things for other teams to be able to use when they go through things like our global impact report. What some takeaways you can have for your own reporting. And one of them is have that clear hypothesis or that theory of change of, we think if we do this, then it's going to cause this kind of impact in the world. And then it becomes a part of holding yourselves accountable too. So I won't go through all the report. We just have like one screenshot in here, which we'll move over to in a second. But when you dig into it, what we really always state is our goal, what we're doing towards it, and this kind of explanation. But the part of it that's really important is sometimes we track data because it's really great and we have a clear data point that's really easy to collect. So that's what we're going to tie it to. So I'll use community stores. Number of stores open is a great metric because it helps keep us accountable to us having a goal of 100. But what's the point of opening a community store if we don't know what the actual impact of that store is, and how are we holding ourselves accountable to that bigger mission? So the original impact, the metric that we still use is how many stores have we opened. But now we see there's a huge opportunity to actually look at what's the economic impact of our stores going into underserved communities with more than just the standard Starbucks setup. So for community stores, for those who aren't familiar with them, we actually currently have almost 17. Our 17th will be opening at the end of this month in Watts, LA. And that's the idea that we have stores that go into underserved communities, and they really become that forefront of what it means to be committed to using your economic power in order to uplift. So I love what Tim was saying at the beginning too, that kind of opportunity, when you start looking at what the opportunities are. When we're looking at community stores, say, great, we show up. One of the things we have a huge ability to inform and affect at Starbucks is who do we hire? Who do we hire to build our stores? Who do we hire to be showcased in our stores? And who do we hire to work in our stores? So community stores have a specific commitment that you have to have a diverse contractor to build the store. And you have to have a local artist be a part of that store, so that not only do we provide that economic opportunity, but we actually reflect the community in that store. We say, we're here. And actually one of my favorite parts about the store is that on each one of our stores, we just updated it, but each one of our stores has a dedication statement. And I think it really resonates to what we were talking about earlier, when you kind of balance out the impact that you're making, but also this idea of the opportunity being that it's not just about, hey, we have a solution, go in there. It's how do you build off of that kind of positive view? How do you build off of what this community already has and its assets and its passion and its love? So, you know, our new dedication statement is, let's work together. Let's grow stronger. Let's build on the love that's already here. This community store is dedicated to this neighborhood. And to me, that's such a powerful message, which is, it really is about how do you use your tools in order to uplift a community that's already in. So again, thinking about, you know, when we're tracking metrics, especially as other corporate leaders or other, you know, teams that are looking at reporting, a couple interesting things to keep in mind. I think we'll touch on a few of these. Is you have understanding the situation. So how do you understand the demographics of the neighborhood? You know, as Tim was talking about earlier, I love balancing data and qualitative, so qualitative and quantitative. So the beginning of this presentation, you know, sparked me. But it's really, how do you take that time to understand what the situation is for the community that you're going into, both qualitatively and quantitatively? Listen, being really critical. Then how do you understand the moment? I think Ingrid did a really great job of capturing what that looks like, which is you can understand what a community needs. And when something big happens, that completely changes the dynamic or exacerbates the dynamic. So you really need to understand the situation, you need to understand the moment, you need to understand your role in that. And so for Starbucks, it's always about, where can we actually make the biggest impact and change that's natural to us? Because A, that helps us make impact part of our business, because it's not just about one department saying we're going to go make this impact. It's, hey, actually the way that we hire is really important. And so we already have a larger diverse contractors and vendors initiative. Let's make sure that we're really holding ourselves strong to that, because that's a huge place for the community. And then of course, tracking your progress. And this is the report, that's the tail end of that. So I think there's examples all the way through. But this report really exemplifies how do you track your progress, how do you track your progress over time, and then how do you use that to hold yourself accountable. And the other really thing that's important about that is it's not always about necessarily saying we set a target, we hit it, hooray for us. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of with Starbucks is that we do two things. We are honest when we don't hit our targets, and we talk about what that actually means and some of the complexity to it. One of the examples of that, it's in the report, but we talked about we wanted to be 100% ethically sourced coffee, right? A huge thing. We also want coffee to be the first sustainable agricultural product. But we're always tracking at about 99% ethically sourced because there's actually a lot of complication just with bringing in new coffee farmers and providing that opportunity for new coffee farmers to actually be able to sell into our value chain. And therefore, we have to weigh this thing up. Do they meet all of our ethical standards? We should go above and beyond those global standards. But also, how do we provide opportunity to up and coming organizations? So for us, it was about saying, this is a goal, and we're okay being 99% and constantly striving towards being 100, but we also want to make way for other opportunities that are part of us achieving larger goals. And every once in a while, we even have to adjust what it is that metric is that we're looking at, like I talked about earlier. A number is great, and be able to say we hit a target, that's fantastic. It always has to come back to the story. And what is the story we're trying to tell? And does that story actually resonate and become a positive change in the world? Or are we just trying to pat ourselves in the back because we've decided to come far? And so, to me, sometimes it feels like, data feels disconnected from storytelling. But again, it is so critical to have both of those in place because storytelling is why we're doing what we're doing. Data becomes the way to reinforce that, but so do the individual pieces of impact. And when we're not achieving what we're looking to do anymore, when that story doesn't really align with even what we're tracking towards, then it's probably a chance to say, we still believe in the story, we still believe in this hypothesis, maybe let's change what we're actually measuring out there in the world. So, like I said, there'll be a link at the end. You can go through all of the old reports if you want to, and just kind of figure out ways to kind of modify it for your own teams. But I really think that that's really important. Really find out what that opportunity is for you to ground yourself as your organization. What are things you feel most fundamentally about, and then how you find ways to track them into the future.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Samantha. I love what you said of like storytelling and how do you build on the love that's already there in that community. I think that is exactly what, Tim and Ingrid and our teams talked about of just, how do we take all the opportunities that is in that community? How do we assess what's happening in that community in the correct way that actually shows that community's strengths, and how we can just be that offer to help. And so I love that you shared that. So thank you so much. And so what we'll do now is just move into some questions. So if you have questions, please pop them into the chat. To start us off, I believe this one was intended for Ingrid first, but if anybody else has any other insights they'd like to offer to this question, panelists, please feel free to jump in. So Ingrid, love the information that you shared. Were there any results from your research that differed from the hypothesis that you started out with?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that it wasn't necessarily fully different than in the hypotheses, but I do have to say there were a couple of insights that I found personally surprising. One was just the amount of optimism, which is a very refreshing insight, to be honest, the amount of optimism that exists in the community towards the recovery. We asked the question around what is the confidence in the own country's economic recovery after COVID-19. And the minority-owned businesses had the largest amount of confidence, right? And they were the most optimistic, and also the most likely to support the community and employees. So offering differentiated services, offering extended pay for their employees, really putting themselves out there to make sure that they were part of that solution. I want to say it's not opposite to a hypothesis that we have, but I was just not expecting the level that we got in terms of how it was coming like from the level of optimism and how much they are doing every day to support their communities around them.
Fantastic, thank you. If anyone has anything else to add, certainly jump in. But if not, Samantha, I have a question for you. So how have you used data and research to help inform what extra services and resources are offered within each community store?
Great question. So we've actually been evolving this a little bit. It's a huge area that I'm digging into more now. So typically, what we've done is we've identified where the stores are based on the local demographics. We want to understand where we think that we can make the biggest impact. And then once we got there, it's been really a store by store, neighborhood by neighborhood approach where we've partnered with our local United Ways in a lot of areas and then local nonprofits to understand what the needs are. And then our store managers and most of our partners are from those stores are actually from those neighborhoods as well. And so they are integral to understanding the point of qualitative. What does their community need? Where can we make the biggest impact? And allowing them to kind of experiment and grow over time as well. Part of what we were finding was each one of we have incredibly passionate store partners and store managers, and sometimes they have a specific area that they really feel a strong connection to and have built strong relationships with. And then we also have initiatives from the Global Impact Team, which is kind of a suite of tools that's available to them. Hey, we work a lot on things like Coffee with the Cop to build that kind of community relationship. We work a lot with food banks and food share programs. Here are some opportunities that might be appropriate for your neighborhood. It really becomes more of that two-way conversation of what the needs are. And part of that is not to dodge the data question. It's to say there's a lot, right? There's a lot of areas where we can affect, and really being able to look at where, because we focus so much on driving through our partners and their passions, where they feel most connected and that they feel like they can make the biggest impact is usually where they can actually show up the strongest. So if there's an area that they feel that they really are committed to, it's youth and development, if it's sustainability, it's all these other factors, then we actually feel like they are more empowered to be able to do that, and we can find different ways to support them as well. And then also with community stores, they are a store and they're an area where we focus in, but we have lots of stores. And so it's certainly not restricted to them being the only ones who can make that impact. And in fact, we're really trying to support this idea of them being the hub of resources. This is my area of focus, but there's a store down the street that also is doing all this incredible community work, and here's how they're chipping in. So we really see this as a holistic system of community stores being that central hub and really focused. But there's so much work to be done that we just want to tap into all of our stores, all of our partners, and how does the headquarters support.
Perfect, thank you. That resonates with me. I told Samantha this earlier, but I was a Starbucks barista back in the day, and I do remember, being able to suggest things and getting that insight. So I really appreciate that. So this is for everyone. So we'll start with Tim and Frankie, move to Ingrid, and then Samantha. But how do you condense the large amount of data continuously collecting into one report, article, or program? So how do you take all of that information and continue to just pump out those awesome reports that you make?
Yeah, that's a great question, because like I started the presentation off with, there is just so much data, and it can be really difficult to sift through what's going to be meaningful and valuable. And that's where kind of what Ingrid described is you need to start with that hypothesis or that question, and then make sure that the data that you're going out and collecting and the methods that you're using for that are really appropriate for answering that question, and that you're not using a method that doesn't fit that question. So that's kind of where I really start, of looking at the question and trying to figure out what is needed to answer it, and also talking to your stakeholders of like, what do you think is needed to answer this? And I'll let Frankie jump in too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely agree with Tim. I think that, once you comb through the data, I think it's always important to share it with the community members themselves and how do they interpret the data. Because there's many things that are out there, as both Samantha and Ingrid talked about the context. we don't know all the context. We don't know all the variables that are going out there, you know, like the social movements that are going on right now. So I think it's important to look at that data and share it with your different stakeholders, but most specifically your community residents, and see what they think and how do they understand it, and what lens are we missing in that interpretation of that data, to then be able to synthesize all that into a report.
Yes, I agree. Not to agree on agreements, but like I agree with what was shared before. And I think, I mean, at the end of the day, there are systems that can help you process the data, right? But you do need the people to actually think about what's coming out of those, drive some of these conclusions, think about what are the what is the data telling you to actually be able to tell a story. You can run in data and spend thousands and thousands of hours processing. So having that objective function at the beginning is really critical. But the short answer to the question is systems and people. It's the main way to actually be like continue to manage and thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ingrid talked about it earlier, and Tim talked about it too. That hypothesis is really important, right? Like, what is it that you actually are trying to understand here? And there could be several, and there could be several different questions, and therefore different data that goes into it. But if you don't start from there, and sometimes it's as easy as kind of talking that out. And for us, it's really great because we have cross-functional teams, because there's so many that are involved in this work, that we just talk it out with them and see if it makes any sense. And to Frankie's point too, going back to the actual communities that you're trying to serve and your customers, and saying, I think if we do this, we measure this, we get that. And believe me, I've been called out by some of our store managers before and be like, why, how did you think this was related? Or you're missing a huge part of the story here. Just being able to account for that. And so, you know, it's easy to get overwhelmed by a lot of information, and it's easy to be tempted by stuff that's really, you know, generally easy to collect and at your fingertips. And it's really trying to discern that kind of quality and quantity side of it as well, which is sometimes when it's easy to collect into something that's normally reported on, that's great, because that way you have that regular cadence and you can be checking. But you really need to ground yourself in what are you trying to answer, and then check back in on it. So after you have your first report out, when you've looked at the data and you've gotten that analysis and you're looking at it, then go back and figure out whether or not that story makes sense, right? Like, here, you know, you help people to frame up the questions and the hypothesis and do the initial understanding of what data to collect. And sometimes it's not until you actually get that first readout that you start to see where that was disconnected. And you actually go into it and you're like, wait, this doesn't really make sense in the context that we're living in right now. What can I go back and adjust? And Ingrid, I just have to shout out to your point about never let the insights drive you. One of my professors at LSE was like her biggest thing. She was just like, if you use data to figure out what your question should be, you've already lost. And so that was that's always stuck with me as well. And so just let the data guide what your question should be. Really have a percent.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for that. We have about 5 minutes of questions left, so I'll just end it with this last question for everyone, and we'll just switch the order. So we'll start with Samantha, then Ingrid, and then Frankie and Tim. So what advice would you give someone who's just starting to collect data or report on their corporate social responsibility efforts?
First, I would say congratulations. Good start. It's got to start somewhere, right? So I think that's the most important part, is just holding yourself accountable as a starting point. So I think writing it down and socializing it all the way through your organization. And so I think that for me is probably one of the biggest parts of it. Is sometimes we forget that leaders say the numbers, and that's great, and it's top line and it's really public, but it really needs to matter to the people who are informing that data, but also who are led by it. And so that's, for us, it's just as important that Kevin Johnson know what the number is as it is that our Starbucks barista knows what that number is. And so when you're doing it, think about how you're sharing that as well, and what change you're looking for with that data, and how you want to hold others accountable. So once you start reporting, there should be a communication strategy with it. There should be thought about how do you actually get this information in front of people in order to make the kind of positive change you want to continue to see, and hold different people accountable differently. But at least you all are singing from the same or sheep. I don't know, I might have messed that analogy up, but so that everyone understands what you're trying to achieve, and then that's also where you can get a lot of that creativity on how you can either continue to expand, or they might have feedback, or they might be able to even help you in their own way to drive that, even if it's not fully tied to the metric. So I would say that would be, just get started somewhere and make sure that that people know all the way through.
I think, Samantha, to add a little bit to what you said, I think that it's good to start small. Like, don't try to cover everything. Like, don't try to be comprehensive. I think every time that I talk about like data, both in the context of what we did, but also in the context of like KPIs and understanding of like you see you can measure everything, and you can find data for everything that you want, and you can drown like you can I don't want to use the word drown again, but like you literally can spend hours and hours and hours planning and analyzing to try to get to the perfect set. Versus, I think my recommendation is start small and then refine and enhance over time. Don't try to cover everything first, because if not, the journey is very long.
So I would say, allow yourself some grace, because you'll be making a lot of mistakes, maybe even asking the wrong questions. Be iterative, be creative, give yourself some room to talk with others outside, and Samantha says inside, and Ingrid's like context, right? I know it sounds like a lot, but if you just take small bites and put a clear plan together, it'll be a great start. And again, just allow yourself that room to learn, most importantly.
I'd agree with all of that, and also just add that if you're able to, try to involve that community voice to make sure that whatever strategies you are implementing is what that community actually needs and wants from you. And if it's not, being able to adapt or find a community where that approach is going to be something they want. Because at the end of the day, it's about helping all these folks, and if it's not something they need or want, let's figure out how those resources can get them something that will help.
Amazing. Well, I just want to thank you all so much for sharing your insights and your reports and all of that amazing data. I really appreciate it. And so I'd like to just welcome now our fearless leader, our Chief Development Officer, Chelsea Carver, who's been with United Way I think over 15 years maybe. So you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I just really want to welcome you and take it away.
Fantastic. So I am Chelsea. It's nice to see. I recognize a lot of your names, so it's nice to see you all. But I think if you go to the next slide, McKenna, I think the thing that stood out for me most through this, which actually was a surprise because I haven't been as involved in planning this one, was that the theme of partnership and how all of the different data pieces that McKinsey grabs or Starbucks looks for or Mile High United Way collects, we are only able to collect when in partnership, and really only mean a true holistic type of experience and data truly when it's done in concert with other data points. So to that end, just wanted to highlight a couple of things that we will send out to everyone who has joined us today, but also just want to put out that these resources are available because, again, the goal of data and the goal of United Way obviously is to support our community. And so to the extent that these are useful for anyone as they're making their decisions, want to make sure that those are available. So we do have our community opportunity index PowerPoint that Tim highlighted earlier. Would be happy to share that and explain sort of the different levels of data that exist there. We also have our American Community Survey data and our school data. And then we also have this hyperlinked bullet here, this 211 needs summaries, which I think is something that makes United Way very unique, but also something that has proved to be really useful to our corporate partners, as we know that making those data-informed decisions is important, whether in business or for your CSR goals. So knowing that we have weekly summaries of all of the presenting needs that have come through our 211 call line, I think is important. I want to thank both McKinsey and Starbucks that they're going to share their, I'm sorry, my dog is behind me, deciding today's the right time to scratch. Want to thank McKinsey and Starbucks that they're going to share both of the reports that they showcased today. And then to the point that this is about a partnership, we do have two needs that we're looking for to better inform our own data. And so that's on small businesses in our communities. We have some great qualitative and quantitative data, but are looking to augment that and make that better and stronger. And then also data on the pace of gentrification in our communities. As we know, Mile High United Way's United Neighborhoods approach really requires us to look at those very specific data points. That would be really helpful if anyone has some of that information they can share. And then on the next slide, just wanted to also put forth here a real-time example and call out some of our partners who have just been amazing data partners with us. This is what some of those 2-in-1 data reports look like. So when I mentioned that those are available to everyone. But I think, you know, as Mile High United Way is taking a look when COVID hit at the changing needs minute by minute, truly. I was on a call where somebody said things are changing minutely. But looking at what those changing needs are for our community, this map and these data points allowed us to pinpoint very instantly, as Frankie said, that technology and access to internet and hardware was going to be of key importance for our community. And so we were able to pivot and talk to Comcast almost immediately about how we could partner with a longstanding program they have, their Internet Essentials program, in order to connect families with internet in sort of real time. And so I think being able to provide Comcast this type of data helped them see, I mean, I'm sure that they have this data also, but really helped marry that partnership really seamlessly. And so to the extent that there are things that you're trying to do in the community that we can help augment with our data, or places where you say, you know, this is a business goal of ours, a CSR goal of ours, we'd like to figure out using your data where we can be best informed, please let us know. We're more than happy to help. We see this as a value that we can provide, given that we have amazing data, and want to make sure that we're sharing it broadly, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all here for, is to make sure our communities are successful. And so with that, I just wanted to thank again Ingrid and Sammy. I know McKenna, I'm probably stepping all over your thank you toes, but Ingrid and Samantha, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you being here. And I will be quiet now, McKenna, and hand it back over to you.
No problem. I know that we're right at time, so thank you everyone for joining us. Again, Samantha and Starbucks, thank you for providing that information for us. And Ingrid, I am so excited to deep dive into that report. So we really appreciate you both. And Frankie and Tim, as always, you make us look amazing. So thank you for joining us as well. If you have any questions, we can certainly answer those for you. And we'll be sending out the slide deck with all of these amazing reports for you just after. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. And thanks for joining us.